is Shalhevet Schwartz, and this is Gefet on Daf Yomi, a joint project of Hadron and Yeshivat Drisha. We are right now on Avodah Zarah Daf Nun Chet, and the topic that we'll be exploring together today is the Isur of Stam Yeinam, an Isur with a lot of contemporary relevance, even as as in our Masechet, many of the topics explored do not necessarily have that much contemporary application. Right, the Isur of yayin nesech, which is, as we'll see, might be, or in some ways, is the parent Isur of Stam Yeinam. Right, the Isur of wine that has been libated to Avodah Zarah doesn't show up so much in our day-to-day lives, but the Isur of Stam Yeinam, of wine that has been in some way handled by a non-Jew, by a Gentile, is something that I think many of us encounter nowadays, and we'll see that a number of the different machlokot about the parameters and the bounds of that Isur actually get into some deeper questions about what the Isur is about in the first place. So let's get started with the Gemara on Daf Nun Chet Bet. Ba'amina Rabbi Asi Rabbi Yochanan. Right, Rabbi Asi asks Rabbi Yochanan, yayin shemisacho oved kochavim mahu. So wine that has been misacho, and we'll see the word here means mixed with water. Wine back then was typically a lot stronger than the wine that we have nowadays. And so in order to prepare it and to make it potable, people would mix water into it. So yayin shemisacho oved kochavim mahu. Amar le, and Rabbi Yochanan answers, ve'ima mizago. Why are you using the word misacho? It's a bit of a weird word for the phenomenon that we're describing. The normal word in rabbinic parlance is limzog, right? Limzog, which nowadays means to pour, but meant to mix with water. Amar le, ana k'tichtiv ka'amina, right? I'm using the language of the Torah, or of the Tanakh. Tfacha misachayina. So that's just a quote from Tanakh that uses the word misacha instead of limzog. Amar le l'shon Torah latzma, l'shon chachamim latzma. And he responds, just use rabbinic language. You don't need to use Torah language to describe this. But anyway, after this brief little interchange about people's word choice, we get to the actual legal question at hand. So the question is, my amar le. Rabbi Yochanan answers, asur mishum lechlech amri nazira schor sochor lakarma al tikraf. So we say that it is asur, right? This wine that has been mixed with water by a Gentile. Why? Because of this isur of lechlech amri nazira, right? It's a quote from the Gemara in a couple of other places. The idea that we tell a Nazirite who is prohibited from drinking or from consuming any kind of grape product, so we tell him to go around. If he finds himself in a vineyard, we tell him to go around and not even to go near the vineyard. And that language is used in kind of rabbinic literature more broadly as an example of l'harchik et ha'adam min ha'avera, of times that we are more machmir about staying far away from certain isurim. So even though this was not a case in which the wine was actually libated, we tell the person that this wine is asur. So very quickly, we're just going to look at Rashi and Tosafot and their understanding of the word misacho. Right, Rashi says, right, shemisacho shemizago natan b'mayim l'takno l'shtiya shekach derech einam right chazak kshayu notnim oto b'kos notnim b'mayim lefi shu chazak. Right, the Rashi said what we just explained before, that what we're talking about is mixing the wine with water, because the wine itself was too strong to be drinkable. And so the question is, Yisrael, where Jewish wine that an idolater did this action of miziga or misicha. And Tosafot just notes there, right, there's this debate, right, the earlier debate about the language used, about whether or not we're using lishnado, right, or lashon Tanakh or the language of Chachamim. So Tosafot just notes that, hey, look, the word limzog also shows up in Tanakh, so why couldn't we use that? Right? We know the phrase al yichsar hamazeg, right? The word mazeg there means mixing wine from Shir HaShirim. Hahi mezika b'yayin atzmo. So that's referring to mixing the wine itself. Aval misicha hi tikun mayim b'yayin. So that in Tanakh, it seems like the word miziga means to mix the wine itself, and misicha is to add water to the wine. Again, this sort of the question about the different language that each of these amoraim are using. But now we'll get back into the actual question at hand, which is, right, we saw in the Gemara, right, it was asked of Rabbi Yochanan, what is the status of this wine? Rabbi Yochanan answers that it is asur. But the question is going to be, what does it mean that this wine is asur, right? We know that we're already became in Masechet Avodah Zarah. Obviously, some things are only asur to consume, and some things are asur b'hana'ah, and that we're going to see is a machloket rishonim that the Tosafot is going to bring. So Tosafot on Shemizago v'kochim v'tekno b'shtiya asur af b'hana'ah. So Tosafot's first answer here is that this wine is going to be asur, even asur b'hana'ah. The afal gav de lo naga. And even though in this particular case, right, we know that the generally sort of Stam Yeinam is when the wine has been touched by a Gentile, but here, right, it was only that the Gentile poured water into it, so he didn't actually touch it. Even though he didn't actually touch it, it's still asur, even bahana'a mishum harchakat avera, right, because of this this principle of kind of staying far away from an avera. What the avera is we're going to see momentarily. Right there, just as we say with this nazir. So that's Tosafot's kind of off the bat. Tosafot is coming out and saying that this isur is even an isur hana'ah. However, he's going to add another shita to the mix here. So miu nimtza bepirush acherim shel Rashi. Right. So this other explanation of the acherim shel Rashi. Is that the wine is asur b'shtiya mishum harchakat avera, aval b'hana'ah vadai lo mitzar delo adif minigia al yedei davar acher shel b'chavana ki hay dinag bereisha deluliv. So according to this other explanation brought in Rashi, the wine is asur b'shtiya, right? The wine is only asur for drinking, and that actually hana'ah would be okay. Right, b'hana'ah vadai lo mitzar, b'hana'ah it's fine. Why? Because it can't be any worse than nigi'ah shelo b'chavana, right? If a Gentile touches wine unintentionally, that wine becomes asur b'shtiya, but not b'hana'ah. So, right, then he brings a case from the previous daf about someone who, coming down from a palm tree, accidentally touches the wine with the palm branch. In that case, the wine is asur b'shtiya, but not b'hana'ah. And Tosafot says here, look, the guy who's pouring the water into the wine isn't even touching it at all. Forget intentionally, unintentionally. So it can't be any worse than that. So it must be, or these are the acherim shel Rashi. It must be only asur b'shtiya, but not b'hana'ah. V'gam Rabbeinu Tam katav dechol lech lo asrinan b'hana'ah. Right, Rabbeinu Tam also agrees that this, right, the principle of lech is only enough to be user b'shtiya, but not enough to be user b'hana'ah as well. Now Tosafot is going to explore a couple of cases in which it seems like there actually is some yisur hana'ah even in it, right, for miziga, but he's going to come up with kind of come up with an explanation. He's going to say that in those cases in particular was there was a knas involved. So right, there's this Gemara a little bit further down in which a Jewish community is like not particularly scrupulous about letting Gentiles mix their wine, and their wine is determined to be a nesech. But what's he going to say? Right, that is a knas. It's a penalty, right? Alma knasu dekanis leo mijum lechamrim. Right, it isn't really that the harchakkah is itself enough to be oser b'hana'ah, but that we're oser b'hana'ah based as a knas about the fact that they were not particularly scrupulous about this rule. And there's another case where they find wine that was mixed by idol worshippers, and we prohibited it. So right there, and it's clear there that we're referring to any isur hana'ah mitam knas kidaparshi. Right there too, it is a knas as I explained. Right, even though it doesn't say so explicitly, right, there are places in which it's clear that the isur is not an actual isur hana'ah, but that we can, but that in certain cases, chachamim could be oser b'hana'ah mishum knas. So, broadly speaking, right, we have this question about Jewish wine, which a Gentile mixed with water. This first shita brought down in Tosafot at the beginning of the Tosafot is that the wine is also asur b'hana'ah as a way of protecting against sin. And the second explanation, the explanation of the Achirim, Rashi, and Rabbeinu Tam, is that it is asur to drink, but mutar b'hana'ah. It's not any worse than unintentional touching, and perhaps hana'ah is forbidden just as a knas, as a penalty. Um, so I want us to right now take a step back from this machloket and think about right what might be behind it. Um, and in order to do that, I think we're going to ask the question of why is Stam Yeinam asur in the first place? And there are a couple of different explanations brought down in the Gemara for why that might be. Um, so what do we have here, right? What are the two different reasons for the prohibition being brought, right? One, the one on the right, there's this concern about libation, about actual yayin nesech, maybe Stam Yeinam, right, which was handled in some way by an idol worshiper. We don't know that he libated the wine, but he might have. And because we have that very real concern, or because we're concerned that if we're not scrupulous about non-Jewish wine in general, then we might come to be non-scrupulous about actual libated wine. So that's reason number one, that there's an actual potential concern about yayin nesech, and this is a way of staying far away from that concern. Reason number two for the prohibition, right, is right in general trying to create distance from idol worshippers and concern in general about intermarriage, about assimilation. Right, there are a lot of different principles, right, even about Gentile food, pat akum, bishul akum, etc. Right, and even non-wine alcoholic drinks where the concern in question is really a concern about assimilation. Food is one of the kind of primary right is a very significant sort of nexus of connection between people and groups of people, and as a kind of a way of maintaining a certain distance and distinctiveness. Right, there are a lot of halachot that require us to right that ultimately end up in a certain kind of separation from our Gentile neighbors. So those, broadly speaking, are the two different ways of understanding or reasons for this prohibition um, of Stam Yeinam. And with that, I think it can shed a little bit of light on the machloket that we just saw and on a couple of different sort of famous machlokot within the world of Stam Yeinam that we'll explore momentarily. So, right, the first is this machloket between Tosafot and Rabbeinu Tam / the Achirim Shal Rashi. Is there any sur hana'ah when it comes to Jewish wine that a Gentile mixed with water? Right, clearly there seems to be no actual concern about libation there. So if really what's going on here is that there's kind of this extra step of removal because we don't want to come to drink libated wine, right? The way that maybe that's what Rabbeinu Tam is understanding. If that's really the concern, then it doesn't necessarily need to go so far as to be asur b'hana'ah. Whereas maybe according to the first opinion of Tosafot, right, who think that the wine would be asur b'hana'ah, maybe what our real concern is not necessarily the libation itself, but is a certain kind of mixing or intermingling with our non-Jewish neighbors. So that's machloket number one. There's a second machloket, perhaps a famous one, because for those of you who are familiar with mavushal wine or try in general, right, or have been in situations in which you've had to drink mavushal wine, right? This is the machloket between the Rosh and the Rambam about whether or not there is an isur of Stam Yeinam with wine that is not ra'ui lemizbeach, wine that is not fit for libations. So mavushal wine or wine that was mixed with honey or sugar, right? These are kinds of wine that were typically, at least back then, not brought in a context of Avodah zarah. And because of that, right, if our real concern is that potentially Stam Yeinam was actually libated or could actually be libated, then those kinds of wine would be perfectly fine. Whereas, right, if I think that the concern again is about a certain kind of intermingling, assimilation, intermarriage, then it wouldn't even necessarily need to be wine. It wouldn't need to be the sort of thing that could be libated at all. And the third is the machloket between the opinion of the Rashbam as brought down in the Torah versus the Tosafot, about whether or not there's any sur hana'ah of contemporary Stam Yeinam nowadays, right? Nowadays, back in the time of the Rishonim, when there were not idol worshippers bringing wine libations, at least not in the society or right kind of geographical area where the Baalei HaTosafot that the Baalei HaTosafot inhabited, right? If I think that no one's bringing libations anymore, then maybe the holy isur of Stam Yeinam is no longer relevant. On the other hand, again, if our concern is one of assimilation or intermarriage or intermingling in some way, then it would be a relevant consideration anyway. And finally, I think we're gonna look at another moment to Tosafot about an interesting kind of test case also for really this question, which is the another Tosafot on our daf about Nesacho. Or on sorry, a part of that Tosafot, the continuation of the Tosafot, that he notes that this whole prohibition of yayin mizago or misacho ovid kochavim, right? That wine when that a Gentile poured water into. This is all in a case of v'dafka shelo nitkaven liga kedei lahachis Yisrael lahafsida. Right, this is all talking about, right? This whole Isur is talking about a case where the non-Jew kind of does it without thinking, right? He doesn't specifically do it in order to anger or upset the Jew and to make him lose out or lose money. Right? If we see that the intention of this idol worshiper, this Gentile who's touching the wine, is in order to kind of to make the Jew lose out, right? If this Gentile is touching wine because he knows that that will render it unfit for the Jew to benefit from, and he wants to basically do something that will kind of irritate or make the Jew lose, right? Right? In that case, it's actually mutar for the Jew to even to drink, because that case is outside of the scope of the Gzera of Chachamim, right? That it's the rabbis did not make a decree about that particular case, right? The idea is that if the Gentile is actually kind of trying to harm the Jew in some way, it doesn't work, right? It's an interesting rabbinic magic move that right it's dafka if he does it unintentionally that it creates a problem, but if he does it intentionally in order to create a problem, the problem magically goes away, right? And in some ways, it's interesting because if we actually kind of go back to the original question about the reason or our svara for Stam Yeinam, here is a moment where actually the machmir position comes out makil and the makil position comes out machmir, right? That if a Gentile touches wine in order to spite a Jew, one may even drink the wine, right? What's the idea there? Right, like it doesn't really make a difference as to whether or not, I don't know, you could say that maybe the the question of libations is also not so relevant to that point, because it's clear what the Gentile is trying to do. But certainly if we're worried about a certain kind of camaraderie, like over familiarity or camaraderie between Jews and Gentiles, and we're concerned about concerns of assimilation here, in a case in which the Jew and the Gentile are clearly in a kind of antagonistic relationship, there's certainly no reason to render the wine a sword, to make it prohibited to drink. So just to step back, we looked at this machloket Rashi Tosafot in the question, right, on the question, or machloket in the achirim shel Rashi / Rabbanit Tam, and the first position Tosafot about the status of wine that was mizago v'kochavim, whether it's asur only b'shtia or asur b'hana'ah. We zoomed out and looked at how that fits into the larger picture of the questions about why it is that Stam Yeinam is asur in the first place. Saw how that plays out with a number of other kind of famous machlokot rishonim, including this interesting case in Tosafot about wine that a Gentile touched specifically in order to harm his Jewish neighbor. Thanks so much, and looking forward to seeing you next week.